We'll go ahead and open up the hearing today, and I ask unanimous consent that members of the Committee on Transportation and Infrastructure who are not on the Subcommittee on Highways and Transit be permitted to sit with the subcommittee at today's hearing, offer testimony, and ask questions. Is there any objection? Hearing none, that will be so ordered. Yesterday we had real good participation from about 16 or 17 members of the subcommittee, and we'll see. I don't know if we wore them out yesterday or not. We had 20 witnesses yesterday. We have 20 more today. We had many other groups who wanted to come testify, but we felt this was about as far as we could go, and it worked great. We had some really great testimony, very helpful, very informative testimony from witnesses yesterday. And of course, this is the second day of the hearing of this hearing from various interest groups interested in the reauthorization of the federal surface transportation programs. We heard yesterday from groups representing transit, highway safety, motor carrier, and freight mobility businesses and organizations. And of course, we have great interest in the highway bill that we hope and think that we're going to have a real good chance of enacting sometime in the next few months. At this time, I'll turn to Mrs. Johnson, who is sitting in for Ranking Member DeFazio, who I think will be here shortly. But Ms. Johnson, if you have any comments you wish to make at this time, you're recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and I am just sitting in for the ranking member who should be here shortly. I want to welcome the panel, and I see a former colleague that I'm very proud to see on this panel. As far as I'm concerned, this is one of the most important parts of transportation, especially now, and look forward to listening to the witnesses. Thank you very much, and I yield back.
All right, thank you, and we're going to, I'm going to let him, give him a second or two to catch his breath, but the new vice chairman of the committee was here yesterday, and very helpful to me personally, and Mr. Hanna, if you have any comments you wish to make, we'll hear from you at this time.
No, sir, we have quite a list of witnesses today.
All right, thank you very much. Does anybody on this side wish to make any opening comments or opening remarks? Mr. Holden or Mr. Series? Yes. Either one. Go ahead, Mr. Series.
Yes, welcome, and yesterday was very informative, and I want to thank the chairman for holding this meeting. I come from a very congested district. I would like to hear what's important to you. We will all love to have a 6-year reauthorization, but I really need to know what is important, what you can endure if there are cuts down the line, because my district just has every kind of transportation you can think of, and I appreciate all of you being here. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. Dr. Harris was here yesterday for almost the entire time, and I hope that you found that helpful and informative, and if you have any opening statement or remarks, you're welcome to speak at this time.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll be brief. We have a lot of witnesses today. I want to thank the chairman for holding these hearings and for your commitment to getting a multi-year authorization. That's what we hear when we go out into the district. We hear problems with the roads. I have a suburban, rural district, and again, I hope we can work toward that multi-year authorization. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Holden. No comments. Chairman Gibbs.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd just like to say, I'm sorry I missed yesterday. My transportation system failed me yesterday. But anyways, I look forward to the committee hearing, hearing what the witnesses have to say, and also a 6-year bill so our entities back at the states and our local governments can plan on road projects. And I think that having a 6-year bill is very important to get that accomplished. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. We've never really done this before in this way, but since we had so many groups that wanted to testify, we decided to try to ask everybody to start wrapping their remarks up after 4 minutes. Hopefully they can get in under 5 minutes in that way, and we will hold any questions until the end, and we're ready to start at this time. And the first witness is Mr. John Nord. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing it correctly, but he's a professional engineer and executive director of the Utah Department of Transportation, and we're certainly honored to have you with us here today.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's a pleasure for me to be here with you and the other members of this committee. As you mentioned, I'm the executive director of the Utah Department of Transportation, and I've had the pleasure over the last 24 years to administer these the federal authorization bills within the state of Utah, the last 10 years of which as the CEO of the Department of Transportation. What I have witnessed over that time is I've seen that each one of these authorization bills has changed the way that we operate as an organization. SAFETEA-LU, as it has been implemented within my state, has degraded our ability as an organization to make engineering judgments about the projects that we think are most important. Funding silos and fractured programs have driven funding decisions more so than engineering judgment. I'm sure that you are all aware that the lack of certainty about long-term funding has stymied our ability to plan long-term and as an organization. There are artificial hoops that we are required to jump through, hoops that we often feel like circus animals jumping through these hoops that interfere with our ability to be efficient and effective in the work that we do. There are duplicative reviews that are required of us. We review it, then we send it over to Federal Highways for a duplicative review, and that really complicates and makes our challenges much more difficult. I don't know if you knew, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, but we are actually, in some cases, prohibited from considering cost when we make decisions about project-level decisions within the Federal Highway Program. I know that Congress, you all members, are concerned about fraud, abuse, and waste. I am not aware of any fraud or abuse within the Federal Highway Program. I am aware of some waste, though, and I'd like to share with you some specific examples of waste within the program. Within my written testimony, which I hope, Mr. Chairman, you'll be able to accept for the record, we describe a performance-based block grant program, pilot program, which would enable a state like mine, the state of Utah, to demonstrate to you what could actually occur within a federal highway program if engineering judgment were allowed to be fully utilized. I'll share with you another example of waste. Just recently, we were informed that the state of Utah and other states that have been using optional exit signs on our interstate are no longer going to be accepted. We anticipate in the state of Utah that the implementation of the new standard will cost our state $78 million. That's just one little state, $78 million, and it will provide no additional safety. It'll provide no additional merit, and we're very concerned about that kind of waste. Mr. Chairman, you've been very generous in allowing us to come and speak with you today, and I've spoken a little bit harsh words, but I want you to understand that we understand that we're living in a world of scarcity as opposed to a world of abundance. I'm concerned, frankly. I think that all of you could agree with me that government is most responsive to the people that is most close to the government that's most close to the people is most responsive to their citizens. And it concerns me that when folks that are 2,000 miles away from my state are making decisions that they're developing processes and making decisions that are one size fits all. In the Utah Department of Transportation, we have been very successful in accomplishing our work and spending our money very carefully. However, one-size-fit-all solutions do not always work for every single state. In my state, we actively practice the practice of living within our means and spending only the resources that we have and getting the most bang for our buck. I believe as we enter into an era of scarcity within the federal program, it is appropriate for us to reevaluate what we're trying to accomplish and begin with the end in mind. What are we trying to accomplish? Establish what those goals are, and then let this bill, this reauthorization bill, be driven by what we're trying to accomplish. In a world of abundance, there are many things that we're able to accomplish through the federal program. In a world of scarcity, I believe we need to scale those things back and come back to the fundamentals of what we're trying to accomplish. We have significant problems if we continue with the federal processes that we're currently working on, which take away local control and take away local decision-making and put it on a national level. These distortions within the program need to go away so that we can be successful in accomplishing the mission of moving this great country of ours on the interstate system, on the surface transportation system. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Director Nord. And now I'd like to recognize for any remarks or statement or comments that he wishes to make the ranking member of the subcommittee, Mr. DeFazio.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I regret that due to problems with air service, I was unable to attend yesterday's hearing. But I'm pleased to be here today and pleased to see that we're now moving forward with hearings pursuant to reauthorization of the Surface Transportation Act. I would just ask that the witnesses do the best they can to summarize what they think are their most cogent points as they go forward. You might even react to someone who went before you if you disagree. And give us specifics. And when I was at one of the listening sessions with Chairman Micah, he kept actually, and I won't do that, and I don't believe Chairman Duncan will, but interrupting people and saying, be more specific and tell me what I can do in terms of making policy changes. And just having listened to the first witness, I would make that sort of admonition to the rest of the panel. You know, give us specific ideas on what we can do in authorization to spend the inadequate resources we have more wisely. In fact, if anyone wants to make the case that current resources are inadequate, which I fully believe and which two commissions have documented, be happy to hear from you on ideas on how we can begin to address needs beyond what the trust fund will accommodate. With that, Mr. Chairman, I look forward to hearing the rest of the testimony.
All right, thank you very much. And I meant to call on Mrs. Schmidt a while ago, and I forgot to do that, and I'd like to ask her for any comments or statements she wished to make at this time.
Thank you, and I'll be as brief as possible, but, sir, you brought up a point I wanted to make in my opening statement, and that is about the mandatory signage that's coming forward in about 3 years. As a former township trustee, our road department did all of the signage for the township. Under this mandate, they will no longer be able to do that. And while a township of my size, of 50,000 people, can afford to have buy signage from a company, other townships in the state of Ohio cannot. Some townships in the state of Ohio have budgets of less than $50,000. Even less of that budget is for their roads. They will be spending that money on the mandatory signage instead of on paving the roads. The cost of just having the gun to make sure that the illumination of the sign is working is about $40,000. Now, granted, local communities can share in that cost. But at a time when states are cash-strapped, when we see states that are looking at ways to balance their budgets on the backs of local governments, finding that local governments are going to see their wallets stretched, this is not the time, I believe, for us to implement that mandatory signage. And so I want to ask the chairman of this committee if we can work for a way to find it affordable and safe for all. And I yield back.
All right. Thank you very much. I'm especially honored today to have a former colleague, a longtime friend, the Honorable Sherry Boehlert, who was such an effective member of this body for 24 years, representing a district in the state of New York. And Congressman Boehlert, we're very pleased to have you here. He served with honor and distinction on this committee, and in fact, during the 6 years that I chaired the Aviation Subcommittee, Sherry was chairman of the Water Resources and Environment Subcommittee, which I then later chaired after your chairmanship, and you paved a good path and set a good example for all of us in many, many ways. It's an honor to
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member DeFazio, two friends of long standing, as you have observed. I'm here on behalf of the Bipartisan Policy Center, which was founded by 4 former Senate Majority Leaders, Tom Daschle, Bob Dole, Howard Baker, and George Mitchell, 2 Democrats, 2 Republicans, bipartisan, supported by a very able professional staff, much like the Congress, bipartisan with a very able professional staff. The BPC's mission is to develop and promote sound policy solutions that can attract public support and political momentum to achieve real progress. BPC's Transportation Policy Project is made up of a diverse group of experts who have come together to chart a bipartisan vision of critically needed reforms to revitalize and focus our national surface transportation programs. Our performance-driven report, which was released in 2009, called for broad and comprehensive reform of transportation policy and programs. Our conclusions and recommendations are directly relevant to the current circumstances because we recognized at that time the need to spend resources wisely no matter how much funding might be available. Our repeated message since 2009 has even greater resonance today. U.S. transportation policy needs to be more performance-driven, more directly linked to a set of clearly articulated goals, and more accountable for results. There are 3 themes I wish to emphasize in my testimony. First, it is critical, despite current economic hardships and fiscal austerity, that we continue to invest adequately in our nation's surface transportation infrastructure. Second, while there is strong and continuing need for adequate investment in the nation's transportation infrastructure, the combination of a mounting federal debt, the broken state of the Highway Trust Fund, and political resistance to new taxes will likely result in a scaled-back authorization bill. That is the political reality of the day. These constrained circumstances and the need to invest wisely create an opportunity, indeed establish the necessity, for policy and programmatic reform. Therefore, perhaps most importantly, federal transportation policy should be reformed to ensure that federal resources are clearly targeted toward national priorities. We have to do more with less, ensuring that infrastructure investment yield the greatest benefit. Investments can be targeted through a performance-driven system able to demonstrate the greatest return on the expenditure. That's what the American people want. I'd like to offer a few specific suggestions. Consolidate, simplify, and in some cases eliminate existing programs to streamline the federal transportation program with an emphasis on the preservation, restoration, and enhancement of the existing system and facilities. Focus the federal program and investments on specific national goals, such as long-term economic growth, energy security, and user safety. Ensure that the federal program is performance-driven, holding recipients of federal funds accountable for the achievement of outcomes. Include competitive programs that can spur innovation in states and metropolitan regions. Reform the transportation planning process to ensure projects with federal resources bring the greatest return throughout the lifetime cycle of the project. Encourage the investment of state, local, and private resources for transportation and investments. While private capital is not a panacea, it can play a larger role than it does today. Support local and state innovation and experimentation through pilot programs to test options for sustainable user fee revenues, such as vehicle mile travel fees. In closing, there are fiscal constraints all across all sectors of government. Though the need for continued investment in our nation's infrastructure is evident, We cannot devote resources, much less borrow dollars, to programs that provide uncertain returns. We need a reformed federal program that advances investment in the nation's interest. No matter how much money is available, you guys have to determine, guys, I use that euphemistically, men and women have to determine the size of the pie. That's not for us. You determine that. We want to make sure it's parceled out, sliced in the right way. We should target investments to the programs and projects that bring the greatest returns. This is an opportunity to do this through the next Surface Transportation Authorization Bill. And I look forward, as does the Bipartisan Policy Center, continuing to work closely with you and your staff to bring the best possible policy for the American public. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Well, thank you very much, Congressman Boehlert. I know that many people look down on the Congress, and maybe at times with good reason, but I also know that all of us who serve consider it a very special privilege to serve in this body. And the Library of Congress put out a thing last year and said that only 500 and some odd number, fewer than 600 people had served in the Congress 20 years or longer. So to have served 24 years like you did puts you in a very small and select group in the entire history of this country. So thank you for your service.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just let me add one antidote. You can't trust a former congressman with a microphone. But I tell people when they say to me, what's Congress really like? What are those men and women up there really like? And I tell them, and I proudly tell them, finest collection of people that I ever served with, whether they're Republican or Democrat, no matter what the region of the country, no matter their political philosophy, people come to this House determined to do the people's work to the best of their ability. And I revere this institution, and I thank all of you for serving in it.
Well, thank you very much, and that is so true. And it's unfortunate that some of the television shows give people the impression that we all hate each other up here, because most of us get along real well with each other, and especially that's historically been true on this committee, and I hope we always keep it that way. Our next witness is Mr. Timothy Ware, the Executive Director of the Mideast Commission from Washington, North Carolina, who is here to testify on behalf of the National Association of Development Organizations. Mr. Ware.
Thank you, Chairman Duncan, Ranking Member DeFazio, and members of the subcommittee.
Pull the microphone a little closer if you can.
Thank you for the opportunity to highlight our ideas for improving and reforming our nation's surface transportation programs, especially for our nation's small, metropolitan, and rural regions. Again, my name is Tim Ware, and I'm the Executive Director of the Mideast Commission located in Washington, North Carolina, and also the President of the National Association of Development Organizations. As the committee crafts a rewrite of SAFETEA-LU legislation, we respectfully submit three main recommendations. First, Mr. Chairman, federal transportation plans and programs should be linked and coordinated more closely with regional community and economic development strategies and priorities developed by local officials, especially in small metropolitan and rural regions. This includes the U.S. Economic Development Administration's Comprehensive Economic Development Strategy. The process is now managed effectively and efficiently by a national network of 382 economic development districts. With fewer public resources available for the maintenance and expansion of our transportation infrastructure, we should target as well as leverage federal resources for projects and programs that are coordinated and prioritized on a sub-state regional level. Second, Mr. Chairman, state transportation officials should work regionally with local elected officials and appointed officials as part of a statewide transportation planning process. This would solidify local support, accountability, and transparency related to the investments of federal surface transportation resources. This was a major goal of the regional transportation planning legislation, H.R. 2782, that you, along with Congressman Tim Walz of Minnesota and 25 other co-sponsors, championed last Congress. Last week, we are pleased that Senators Amy Klobuchar of Minnesota and Lamar Alexander of Tennessee reintroduced companion legislation, Senate 625. The members of NATO strongly support this important legislation. Third, Mr. Chairman, federal and state policies should take into consideration the unique conditions and challenges of our nation's regions and communities, especially those outside of the major metro areas. This point includes a range of important policy issues. Among these are ensuring that private sector firms and citizens in small towns in rural America are connected to global, national, and regional hubs. We're also working to reduce rural road fatalities and injuries and meeting the needs for alternative transportation services for both private sector businesses and rural citizens. As one example, the export agricultural sector remains one of the United States' most competitive, with a value of more than $115 billion in 2009, according to USDA's Economic Research Service. To remain at the forefront globally, it's essential that we expand our capacity to aggregate, process, and distribute our goods, commodities, and services in a timely and seamless fashion, not only here at home, but also globally. In closing, Mr. Chairman, we support efforts to strengthen the coordination of our federal transportation investments and plans more closely with regional and local community and economic development strategies, including those supported with other agencies such as EDA. In states such as Arizona, Kentucky, Missouri, Pennsylvania, South Carolina, and Tennessee, it's been proven that when state transportation officials work regionally and in a more cooperative manner with local elected and appointed officials as part of the statewide transportation planning, federal investments are more effectively utilized. We also want to ensure that our federal transportation policy takes into consideration the vital community and economic development contribution of rural-based industries and sectors to our nation's economic, energy, and national security. Thank you again, Mr. Chairman and members of the subcommittee.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ware. Our next witness is Mr. Ashby Johnson, AICP, who is the Deputy MPO Director for the Houston Galveston Regional Council, who's here to testify on behalf of the Association of Metropolitan Planning Organizations. Mr. Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member DeFazio. AMPO is a nonprofit membership organization established in 1994 to serve the needs and interests of over 380 metropolitan planning organizations nationwide. From the MPO perspective, here are a few ideas that would improve project delivery and stretch federal resources. First, metropolitan areas are the nexus of the nation's safety, freight, mobility, and system preservation concerns. We need to leverage federal funding as much as possible, and we can do so by suballocating federal funding to metro regions across all core highway and transit programs. Second, we need a clearly articulated federal transportation mission, and freight should be prominent in that mission. Freight is a matter of national and global competitiveness. Most freight is going to or coming from metro areas, and most of the nation's ports, whether marine or land-based, are in metro areas. MPOs need a well-funded freight program or more flexibility in existing programs so that public funds can be used to leverage private investment in freight facilities. Third, eliminate duplicative and conflicting transportation planning requirements for federal highway and transit investment, and this gets to some of those hoops that you heard Mr. Nord mention earlier. Fourth, extend the life of completed environmental documents from the current 3 years so that the environmental finding lasts 6 years. Also require NEPA lead agencies to use the results of planning level analyses rather than duplicate the effort later on, and this will save time and reduce cost. Fifth, reform air quality conformity. Conformity is currently focused on process rather than outcome, and is designed to stop added capacity roadway projects rather than improve air quality. By the way, added capacity roadway projects show far more emissions benefits for air quality because they reduce congestion and idling, and EPA's new MOVES model bears this out. Sixth, expand and preserve the eligibility of activities currently funded under CMAQ. Congress can increase flexibility in this program by removing the 3-year limit of support for van pooling and carpooling and extending it further. Also extend the eligibility of operating costs for new transit services from the current 3 years to 5 years and increase support for traffic operations under all programs. Lastly, please include a modest increase for planning activities so that metro areas can be full partners with state DOTs and transit operators and add even more value to the transportation planning process. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I'll close my remarks.
Thank you very much, Mr. Johnson. The next witness is Mr. Frank McCartney, who is the Executive Director of the Delaware River Joint Toll Bridge Commission, who's here to testify on behalf of the International Bridge, Tunnel, and Turnpike Association. Mr. McCartney.
Mr. Chairman and members of the subcommittee, good morning. I'm the president of the International Bridge, Tunnel, and Turnpike Association. IBTTA, as we're better known, is the worldwide association for owners and operators of toll facilities and service providers to our industry. Thank you for giving us the opportunity today to present our recommendations on how to improve and reform the nation's surface transportation programs. IBTTA is unique among the stakeholders at these hearings. While most of the other groups depend on the fuel tax to support mobility and infrastructure development, our 60-plus U.S. toll agency members do not. They operate more than 5,200 miles of highways, bridges, and tunnels and receive no federal or state funds. Together, these 60-plus agencies collect about $10 billion in tolls annually, which is equal to about 1/3 of the annual federal gas tax revenue. That's reason enough to consider tolling and road pricing as alternative funding solutions. And it brings me to IBTTA's 5 recommendations to improve and reform the nation's surface transportation programs. First, we have to remove the barriers to tolling and pricing. Giving states the flexibility to consider tolling, and I stress flexibility, to consider tolling is even more critical now when federal and state revenues are constrained. Funding needs are huge, and most public officials will not consider raising the gas tax. Many lawmakers have said they support tolling for new capacity, but not for existing capacity. The fact is, reconstructing the highway system, the interstate highway system, will cost far more than what it costs to build in the first place. Removing barriers to tolling would encourage states to begin the massive effort of reinvesting in our system. That investment, in turn, will create jobs and improve the economy. Second, we ask that you expand TIFIA resources to between $5 billion and $10 billion. TIFIA can help advance important transportation projects that would otherwise be delayed or deferred. According to published reports, each dollar of TIFIA assistance can leverage at least $30 in transportation infrastructure investment. That is an incredible leverage. Third, leave decisions about interoperability to industry experts. IBTTA is working proactively and cooperatively with toll industry groups to forge a common interoperability agenda. We're concerned that prescriptive federal standards and guidelines could impede the industry's effort to improve broad-scale interoperability. For this reason, we ask you to leave this important work to toll industry experts. Fourth, give states, localities, and agencies maximum flexibility to choose from the financing tools that best align with local needs, including the use of public-private partnerships and long-term concession agreements. Finally, begin the transition to mileage-based user fees. As we become to rely more and more on renewable energy and less on petroleum-based fuels, we must develop a transportation funding mechanism that matches our usage patterns. Mr. Chairman, IBTTA is keenly aware of the struggle to manage the new traffic demands while continuing to maintain and rehabilitate our existing infrastructure. Tolling isn't the only solution, but it is an important one. IBTTA stands ready to help implement it. Call on us. Our members are eager to help you create a new vision. Thank you.
Just one quick question. I understand about the prescriptive standard, that the government wouldn't dictate the standard, but how about the government just says we have to have an interoperable system? Because I find that I don't find that the industry is moving very quickly toward interoperability. We just say you've got to have an interoperable system by such and such a date. We won't tell you how to do it, just do it.
We would support that.
Great, thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Mr. McCartney. Our next witness is Mr. Brian Grody, who is the co-founder of Mercator Advisors, LLC, and a member of the National Surface Transportation Infrastructure Financing Commission, a very important commission. Mr. Grody.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. I'm going to focus on financing tools that can be used to stimulate greater investment, especially in this fiscally constrained environment. My remarks are grounded in the work that I do in helping project sponsors develop financial plans and implement capital programs. They also reflect my experience with the federal government, especially the Department of Transportation. I helped design and implement the TIFIA program. I served as its first director following enactment in T21. And of course, they do reflect my service on the Financing Commission as well. In particular, federal credit and tax incentives can be effective tools for the following reasons. Project sponsors must identify revenue streams. The market discipline of having private and other non-federal investment helps ensure that projects are economically sound and financially viable. The tools can be applied to both public and private projects, and they have a much smaller budgetary impact than traditional grants. One way for the government to stimulate investment is to offer credit assistance through a program like TIFIA. By providing a limited amount of patient capital, TIFIA provides powerful leverage, as Frank mentioned, greater than 30 to 1 in terms of the investment, the capital investment to the subsidy cost. Not surprisingly, the primary recommendation, as you've heard many times, is to increase funding for the TIFIA program. 2 years ago, the Financing Commission recommended a funding level of $300 million per year. That would be nearly a threefold increase. But given the recent credit demand that has been expressed and the anticipated pipeline of major projects, it might be appropriate to consider a higher level. Annual funding of $300 to $500 million, for example, could support 15 to 25 billion of loans and leverage 45 to 75 billion of total investment over the next 5 years. Beyond more resources, there are some technical changes that could improve the utility of the TIFIA program. I briefly described them in my written testimony, and just to note, some of those would include broadening eligibility to include programs of related projects, authorizing upfront contingent commitments for programs of related projects. That would both mitigate finance risk and help DOT manage a highly variable pipeline of projects, allowing truly subordinate TIFIA loans for some projects by modifying or even waiving the so-called springing lien, and strengthening the TIFIA institutional platform. Like credit assistance, tax incentives can also stimulate greater investment at just a fraction of the scored cost of grants. I know tax code changes are not under this committee's jurisdiction, but in developing any comprehensive federal financing strategy, they should be considered. First, Congress should continue and expand the Highway Intermodal Private Activity Bond Program. The Financing Commission recommended increasing the volume cap and suggested some other technical changes that would improve the use of this tool. Second, Congress should consider authorizing a qualified tax credit bond program for surface transportation. The Financing Commission recommended that any such tax incentive be structured narrowly to facilitate the financing of major projects with large public spillover benefits. A tax credit bond program for surface transportation could meaningfully supplement the existing federal program supported by the Highway Trust Fund with a modest scored budget impact. And with that, I'll conclude, and thank you again for your time.
Thank you very much, Mr. Grody. When we write our bill, we plan to pay close attention to the report from your commission, and we recognize that you are one of the leading experts on innovative financing, and while we do not have the final say on the taxing provisions, the Ways and Means Committee has traditionally accepted our recommendations in that regard, so we will certainly be offering some suggestions. We also are pleased to have another member of that commission, Dr. Adrian Moore, who is the Vice President of the Reason Foundation, and he's here on behalf of the commission also. Dr. Moore.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Mr. DeFazio, and members. I wanted to open up by building a little bit on Congressman Boehlert's comments about the need to prioritize and shape spending on a performance basis. I think one of the most fundamental questions the Congress faces with transportation reauthorization is how to live within expected revenue, and that expected revenue is probably adequate in the coming years for a program that is focused on projects of true national interest, where they further interstate commerce. That's not adequate to fund state and local programs and needs. And so, in a lot of ways, the coming years are going to be facing what exactly is going to be the federal government's responsibility to fund, and to what extent are state and local governments going to have to take more responsibility for the projects at their levels, rather than looking to the federal government to help out with those things. So, in that spirit, when the National Infrastructure Finance Commission started looking, we were a sometimes painfully bipartisan commission, and we looked at every mechanism that could fund the National Transportation Program that anyone suggested to us, and it was a very long and exhaustive list. And we unanimously arrived at the conclusion that the best mechanism in the long run is mileage-based user fees. They are effective, more effective than most of the alternatives, more economically sustainable than the alternatives, and at least as fair as any of the alternatives. And so by our sort of thorough analysis, we concluded that that would be the best way to fund the program in the future. But it's still a mechanism that's in development. We are not ready to pull the trigger on mileage-based user fees right now. But fortunately, the work on this has continued since the Commission made that recommendation. We've had a number of reports come out, notably the National Cooperative Highway Research Program, looking at this and laying out very specifically what next steps should be. Texas Transportation Institute doing something similar. Several university reports, and even state-level Departments of Transportation studies. The Mileage-Based User Fee Alliance, of which Reason is a member, has been formed to help advance the practice of mileage-based user fees. And most important of all, a number of states are, with differing levels of aggressiveness, pursuing the possibility of mileage-based user fees in their own future state funding. And so there's an opportunity in this authorization for Congress to partner with state and local governments to advance our knowledge and our capability to use mileage-based user fees, and keep our long-range transportation funding flowing from user fees rather than transitioning to less direct and less efficient and less effective sources of funding. The first need is clearly for larger scale trials at the state and local level of mileage-based user fees. And I think that in this authorization, Congress should fund, on a competitive basis, state and local governments to conduct such trials, and that the State Department the Federal Department of Transportation should ensure that those trials are high quality, that everyone benefits and learns from those trials, and that they examine the really crucial issues that we know remain with the use of these mileage-based user fees, which are how to ensure and protect privacy, and this is not an exhaustive list, but the highlights: how to ensure and protect privacy, what technologies can be utilized and what structures will work effectively, test an array of geographic and demographic participants, and on much larger scale than we have to date, reduce the costs of collection within this system, and explore how this would replace gasoline tax, or fuel taxes, I should say, as a means for funding the transportation infrastructure. This authorization period is a chance for Congress to preserve the user fee principle of funding transportation, to empower state and local governments to take the lead in developing the means of making these user fees work, and to take significant steps towards making the next generation of user fees viable in time to replace fuel taxes before the current system becomes unviable. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Moore. It's fascinating that you would be so strongly in favor of a vehicle miles traveled system when many libertarians and people associated with the Reason Foundation and Reason Magazine would have privacy concerns about that. But anyway, that's, right. Yeah, sure.
Well, I think he did express the privacy concern, and that is a potential barrier, because I think, and I'd just see if Dr. Moore agrees, that if we're going to move in this direction, different travel puts different burdens on the system. If someone's choosing to travel at rush hour in a very congested city, that's adding a burden, unlike, say, a rancher who has to drive 20 miles to the general store to pick up a part for machinery or something. And so if we moved in this direction, ultimately, would it not need to, you believe, include time, place, that sort of thing?
It would at least need to include that option. It's not clear that it would necessarily have to include that for all participants. And as you say, you know, as a libertarian, I'm pretty fanatical about privacy, but I am convinced, having swum in these waters now for 4 years, that it is perfectly feasible, both technologically and administratively, to ensure people's privacy while utilizing mileage-based user fees.
Yeah, and I think the state pilots, that was the direction we were headed last year with the bill, so is a way to explore that better and see that it works. One other quick question. If in looking at commercial versus individual vehicle, the privacy issues are certainly less significant. I mean, a lot of companies track their trucks minute by minute anyway. They know where they are with GPS and that. Do you think we could move there more quickly commercially?
It would be technically easier. I'm not sure it would be practically easier, just because, I mean, that then creates its own set of fairness issues and potential political problems. And it doesn't get us where we really need to go, which is we need to get everybody involved, because
right.
Familiarity breeds comfort with this kind of technology. As people use it, they realize that it works and that their privacy is protected.
Sure, but you know, in my state, we do have a weight mile tax, which equitably distributes the costs, and so I mean, it could be done, you know, on the commercial versus private sectors.
Agreed.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. We've been joined. I was going to go to Mr. Petri, but also Mr. Sutherland came in a few minutes ago. Do you have any statement or comments you wish to make, Mr. Sutherland?
Sure. I thank you, Mr. Chair, for recognizing me. I'm curious about your presentation. I mean, obviously, we you know, mileage-based user fees. Obviously, we currently have that when you go to the pump. I mean, the more you drive, the more gas you put in your car, the more taxes you pay. That's clearly a user fee by definition, I would think. And I'm amazed at the hope and the suggestion that the government, who in my opinion does not give the American people a proper rate of return on their investment, has the ability then to monitor and to judge time, place, and purpose of an individual driver. I mean, I'm amazed at your hope that this government has the ability to follow that. I mean, that's a lot of trust you're placing on a government that can't manage itself very well.
I would absolutely not advocate that the government impose measurement of time, place, and purpose on travel. That's not necessary in order to have a mileage-based user fee system. All you need to have is a device that will tell the government this person owes $32.95 this week. It doesn't have to report any information about where you drove. The onboard computer can calculate the fees and only transmit the fee and then dump all of the information it used in order to calculate that fee if need be. So it is possible. That's the only reason I am convinced to advocate for this, is that it is possible to have a system that does not do that. And it's superior economically to the gas tax.
I'm going to ask that Mr. Sutherland hold any more questions until the end, as other members are doing. But do you have any other statement or comment? All right,
thank you.
We're trying to move through these witnesses as fast as possible, and our next witness is Mr. John Robert Smith, who is the president and CEO of Reconnecting America and former mayor of Meridian, Mississippi. Mr. Mayor, honored to have you with us.
Thank you, Chairman Duncan, Ranking Member DeFazio, distinguished members of the committee. I want to thank you on behalf of Reconnecting America and Transportation for America that I co-chair for holding this hearing today on how we may improve and reform our service transportation programs. Before coming to Washington, D.C., about 2 years ago, I was a 16-year Republican mayor of my hometown of Meridian, Mississippi. Meridian is a small city of 40,000 people, but we are the retail, medical, transportation, education, employment, trade draw for 350,000 people in 11 rural counties in Mississippi and Alabama. And as mayor, I know firsthand the transportation challenges that those who live in small towns in rural America face each and every day. Mr. Chairman, when we visited in your office, we talked about those small cities and rural states, and that's where I'll focus my comments. Certainly it may come as a surprise to some, but Americans who live in these small towns have the same transportation needs as those who live in big cities. They need access to jobs, to health care, to education, and to services. Long commutes, rising gas prices, and shifting demographics all impact the prosperity of those communities and the people who live in them. Regional intermodal transportation connections are critical to those people, yet many small towns lack the financial resources, the planning capacity, or the authority to implement the solutions for their transportation needs. A bold new policy is needed at the federal level, but with its significant impact from state and local units of government. Transportation for America recognizes that it is important to first fix this country's crumbling transportation infrastructure. In fact, we're releasing today a report on the state of disrepair of our nation's bridges, and I would imagine each of you will have bridges in your district on that list. Mr. Chairman, Tennessee is in a better position than most of its sister states. In addition to repairing our nation's infrastructure, we need to focus on transportation options that provide choices in this era of rising gas prices. Many aging citizens and veterans in small towns depend on public transit to go to see their doctor, to go to the grocery store. Working parents need to get to their jobs, to children's daycare, and to complete the errands of the day. And our college students in small towns need to be able to access the local higher institutions of education and the part-time jobs that most of them have to hold down. Public transit must be funded both in urban and rural areas. Additionally, the quality of life that transportation options provide is important. When I first came to D.C. 2 years ago, there was a lot of discussion about this term, livability. Well, I found it was what we had been doing in Meridian, Mississippi for 16 years, but we called it economic development. Those transportation connections and the economic development they brought empowered people to make decisions without being hindered by distance or gas prices. Whatever term you want to put on it, it doesn't matter. People want to live where they want to live, work where they want to live, and where they want to work, and they want to get there in a cost-effective and timely manner. Providing transit options leads to increased investment in city centers that are on the downside. And I saw that in Meridian, where we invested $1 million on the behalf of the city, leveraged $5 million in iced tea funds, and with that we built the South's first multimodal transportation center. Totally revived Main Street, brought people back downtown to work and to live, brought entertainment and job options into our downtown, and leveraged an additional $135 million of public-private sector investment within 3 blocks of that facility. The return was worth the investment, not only to the people of Meridian, but in the 11 rural counties surrounded. And it's been successful in other states. In North Carolina, in Congressman Coble's district, both in Greensboro and Salisbury, investing in transit has brought economic development into the downtowns. Chairman Duncan, imagine if the congested area of Gatlinburg, Pigeon Forge, and Sevierville in the Smoky Mountains had some transportation alternatives to move visitors and conventioneers to the sites and hotels that they want to go to. That would be a huge step in relieving the traffic bottlenecks on US 441 and Highway 66, and I visit that area yearly. To conclude, small cities and rural states are a part of a national transportation system, and the people who live in them have the same concerns as their neighbors in big cities. We must have a balanced approach in this 6-year authorization bill. hearing the voice of big cities, but small cities and rural areas alike. And we have specific policy recommendations on the rural side that we will have offered in my written testimony. Thank you so much.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Mayor Smith. And we're now honored to have as the next witness Ms. Sharon Calvert, who is the co-founder of the Florida Alliance and who is a leading citizen activist in the state of Florida from Tampa, I understand. And Ms. Calvert, you may begin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for this opportunity to provide public testimony to the Transportation Subcommittee on Highway and Transit hearing. I represent the Florida Alliance. It's a coalition of grassroots organizations in the state of Florida representing thousands of citizens across the state who have focused on transportation issues in Florida over the last year. We want to ensure that the taxpayer stakeholder is allowed to provide input and ideas as we are the users and the funders of the transportation projects. There are limited resources available today to fund transportation projects. The economic climate insists that those limited resources be used for the must-do needs and not the nice-to-do expenditures. Therefore, the Highway Trust Fund must be reformed to its original core functions. To that end, we support the Transportation Empowerment Act, which was introduced by Senator DeMint in April of 2008, and H.R. 632, which is the Highway Fairness and Reform Bill recently submitted by Arizona Congressman Flake. These bills empowers the states to collect most of the federal gas tax monies that are currently being sent to Washington and reverses the trend that started in 1982 when 10 earmarks were included in the Transportation Reauthorization Bill, and those earmarks grew to over 7,000 in 2005. The Transportation Empowerment Act and H.R. 632 could reduce federal bureaucracies and empower the states to determine their own transportation priorities. This bill, or these bills, would allow donor states, like the state of Florida, to retain 100% of their gas taxes, rather than receiving only about 80 cents back for every dollar sent to Washington. Secondly, regarding the Highway Trust Fund, approximately 38% of federal gas taxes are diverted from roads and highways, the largest diversion being made to transit programs. Rediverting those funds back to roads and highways will bring the much-needed revenue to improve our roads, highways, and bridges, which are used on average by 98% of Americans who travel every day. Thirdly, all transportation projects should be required to pass cost-effectiveness criteria, state its return on investment, reflect the share of the total cost paid by users, and what the benefits that other taxpayers get from their share of the cost. Transportation projects must not consider livability criteria, which is subjective, cannot be well-defined or quantified. Immeasurable livability objectives perversely justify projects that increase traffic congestion, increase travel times, and raise housing prices. Capital projects must prove they have funding to support the ongoing operations, maintenance, and periodic major rehabilitation, replacement, or reconstruction that's required to sustain the projects. For example, there is currently a backlog of major maintenance for existing rail systems of $78 billion. Transit projects should be approved only if they improve automobile travel times and do it at a lower cost per passenger mile than any alternative, including expansion of highways. Effective use of these limited resources for transportation projects require efficient use of the resources by setting measurable goals with the ability to meet those goals at the lowest cost with the greatest benefit. Furthermore, private bus service, which exists in Florida and throughout the nation, moved more people last year than Amtrak. We need to remove barriers and regulation to encourage private sector solutions, such as local shared taxi services, which resemble airport shuttle services, that many airports provide. These types of services exist today in Atlantic City and Puerto Rico. And finally, there are innovative solutions on the horizon to support personal mobility, which includes intelligent traffic management and cooperative adaptive cruise control. Those allow more throughput on existing roads. Road solutions, such as the double-decker Selman Expressway in Tampa, Florida, increase capacity without having to acquire additional right-of-way. And we also cannot discount telecommuting, which will decrease congestion on our roads at zero cost to the taxpayer. Thank you again on behalf of the Florida Alliance, representing the taxpayer stakeholder, for this opportunity to provide testimony.
Thank you very much, Ms. Calvert. Very fine testimony. Our next witness is Mr. Raymond Papour. Is that the correct pronunciation?
Yes, it is, Mr. Chairman.
Executive Vice President of the National Construction Alliance. And you may begin.
Thank you, Chairman Duncan and Ranking Member DeFazio and the distinguished members of the Highway and Transit Subcommittee. On behalf of the National Construction Alliance 2, better known as NCA2, which is a partnership between the International Union of Operating Engineers and the United Brotherhood of Carpenters, both unions represent about 1 million construction workers that build our nation's infrastructure. And boy, do we need jobs. Let me get right to the point, Chairman Duncan. The NCA2 believes that the primary obstacle to improving the nation's surface transportation programs relates to highway trust fund solvency, while other issues, particularly environmental streamlining to more quickly deliver projects, should be addressed by Congress. As committee members well know, the needs of the Highway and Transit Program have simply outstripped the revenue dedicated to the Highway Trust Fund. In order to improve the health of the national economy, which is precisely what is at stake with this committee's work on the reauthorization of the nation's surface transportation programs, Congress should focus on shoring up the trust fund to meet the nation's surface transportation deficiencies and revive the ailing construction economy. You know, the NCA2 commends the administration for acknowledging the dramatic needs in the transportation sector and proposing a spending level for reauthorization of $556 billion that recognizes America's substantial transportation deficiencies. For Congress to enact a reauthorization that falls short of our demonstrated transportation needs would, in our judgment, result in weaker economic recovery, persistent high unemployment in the construction sector, unstable highway trust fund, more dangerous bridges and highways, and American economic vulnerability in the face of unrelenting global competition. Yet, as you well know, the revenue question remains. That is the most politically challenging issue facing reauthorization on both sides of the aisle and with the administration. While the NCA2 supports a variety of innovative financing mechanisms for an appropriate range of projects, there exists a fundamental need for real revenue in the Highway Trust Fund. Let me be perfectly clear. The NCA2 supports a gas tax increase. For over 50 years, the gas tax has proven to be an equitable, efficient funding mechanism, but is one that has failed to keep pace with inflation and the level of need. We reached the same conclusion as the two commissions that were created under SAFETEA-LU to examine the future of the transportation program. An increase in the gas tax is necessary in the short term. This is no time for Congress to backpedal on the surface transportation investment levels that the country so badly needs. China and our other global competitors are not waiting. In short, we need this committee's leadership to help solve the revenue question. Now, on the other side, tens of thousands of operating engineers and carpenters are out of work. They want to build our nation's infrastructure. We have the highest unemployment rates since the Great Depression in construction. We've got 2 million people that are construction workers that are unemployed right now that want to help build our nation's infrastructure. They want to contribute. They do not want to draw unemployment. They would rather be paying taxes to help reduce the deficit. You know, when I look at this, the work of this committee, one thing becomes clear, and I know you're very conscious of the massive debt our country has. I have 7 grandchildren. I don't want to leave them a debt. But I know, and I think you know, that the debt was not caused by this committee or investment in our infrastructure. We need to invest in our infrastructure if we want to compete in this global economy that we're in. If we want to bring America back to where it really needs to be, Mr. Chairman, your committee has to do this work. We have to get this bill reauthorized. And I've been around this town long enough to know how long it takes to get a 6-year bill reauthorized. It always seems to take a couple extra years. Maybe we should look at a 10-year bill or something longer. But as Labor, we stand ready and willing to work with your committee. We thank you for the opportunity to offer this testimony. Thank you.
If Chairman Hanna will yield to me for a moment.
Certainly.
Mr. Purpore, I agree with you, and I've said it many times in many places that we need to stop rebuilding Iraq and Afghanistan and start rebuilding the United States of America.
Agree.
Thank you, Mr. Purpore. This is my 25-year card as a member of your union. So I just thought I'd point that out, if you don't mind me indulging myself. Thank you. Mr. Greg Cohen, Executive Vice President, National Construction Alliance. President and CEO, thank you, I'm sorry. American Highway Users Alliance, thank you for being here. You're recognized.
Thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member DeFazio. The Highway Users Alliance brings together a wide range of users that contribute to the Highway Trust Fund. Our members include AAA clubs, trucking and bus companies, motorcyclists, and RVers. These and hundreds of other businesses and associations represents millions of highway users from coast to coast. We have long supported the idea of a self-sustaining user fee-supported highway trust fund. Despite myths to the contrary, as Mr. Purpore said, fuel taxes that support the trust fund have been relatively stable, albeit inadequate. We'd like to work with the committee also on an innovative financing. We've long supported tax credit bonds, but we've been very concerned by the administration's infrastructure bank proposal, which gives U.S. DOT staff sole authority to select the projects that receive funding. In addition, we'd support an effort to make greater use of the general fund for a variety of transportation programs, including roads. As states face fiscal realities, a critical way Congress can help is by reducing bureaucratic barriers that delay project approvals. At a minimum, Congress should be vigilant in ensuring that new and time-consuming planning requirements do not find their way into this next bill. Instead, we ask that Congress review and eliminate as many existing requirements as reasonable. To streamline project approvals, Congress could do a great deal, including setting hard deadlines for interagency reviews and expanding the existing NEPA pilot delegation program from SAFETEA-LU to all states. Some have suggested that the federal government should have increased control over local planning, project selection, and the distribution of money. We strongly disagree. Instead, Congress should authorize a bonus fund that provides formula funds to states that meet performance criteria that you, the Congress, set. By doing so, you'd create incentives for states to take on projects of federal interest without twisting their arms or micromanaging their project selections. We recommend prioritizing performance in 4 national needs. 1 is safety, 2 is congestion relief, 3 is truck freight corridors, and 4 is aging critical infrastructure. On the first, safety. Nearly 34,000 annual deaths occur on American roads. Most involve lane or road departure, a preventable problem. In addition to prioritizing the new Safety Corps program, we also support robust funding for high-risk rural roads, investments to aid older drivers, and the Surface Transportation Safety Bill that Mr. Rahal and Mr. Petri and Schuster and Corinne Brown all co-sponsored this year. In addition to guaranteeing funding for safety programs, that bill also allows the states to certify their need for proprietary safety products that further their strategic safety plans, and we join AASHTO in supporting that. On congestion relief, there are numerous ways to address congestion. We support giving states a wide latitude to approach these problems, but add that capacity improvements needs to be among the menu of options available. As our economy rebounds, highway travel has increased 15 months in a row. As long as the economy continues to expand, high gasoline prices are not going to reduce traffic. People drive to participate in the economy, to access the full range of services and products that improve their lives. All this driving is actually good for America and good for livability. But if our transportation system is inadequate, congestion develops and productivity declines. Today, that costs us $115 billion a year just in wasted fuel and time alone. On truck corridors, expansion of the national highway system, including the interstate system, as well as freight bottleneck relief should be a critical priority in the next authorization bill. Federal leadership from Congress is needed here. The Constitution gives the federal government the right to regulate interstate commerce. And we need to have a consistent national freight mobility, and we need to continue unimpeded commerce on our toll-free interstate highway system. On renewal and replacement of aging infrastructure, our major highways are showing their age. The administration has proposed getting our roads and bridges up to a good state of repair. We agree, but they must also be brought up to a good state of operation. That can involve capacity as well as improved conditions of pavements and bridges. You can't just improve the condition of the pavements and bridges and not provide for the good operation of that road. In conclusion, we're completely committed to helping you get this bill done this year. We believe you can do it, and we appreciate being your partner in this effort. Our members and our growing, we're now at 13,000 strong social network of highway enthusiasts. We're standing ready to help provide you the support you need both inside the Beltway and outside to get this legislation enacted. Thanks again for the invitation to be here.
Thank you, Mr. Cohen. Mr. Paul Dieterich, President, Industrial Builders, on behalf of the Associated General Contractors. You're recognized, sir.
Thank you for your patience in sticking around listening to this testimony. My company was started by my father in 1953, and we've been a member of the AGC of America since that time, and since Friday of last week, I'm a vice president of the AGC. My dad testified twice in support of a highway bill, and this is my second time at bat. The reason I come here is to highlight the importance of a continuing strong federal role in transportation infrastructure investment in the United States. It's vitally important to a company like ours to have some certainty that there will be work for us to compete for on an ongoing basis. The lack of a long-term authorization bill and a series of extensions has had an impact on our industry. We can't make long-range plans about hiring decisions, and we defer equipment purchases. It's had an impact on the people who work for us. Construction careers that built the country look a lot less attractive if the government turns the program on and off like a light switch. The challenge in writing the next surface transportation authorization is how to prioritize targeted investments in the face of declining highway trust fund revenue. Current trust fund revenue does not meet the maintenance demands of the federal aid highway system, much less address the need for additional capacity, intermodal improvements, eliminating bottlenecks, and improving safety. When Eisenhower signed the first highway bill in 1956, the user fee was 3 cents a gallon, and a first-class postage stamp was exactly the same amount. Today, the user fee stands at 18.4 cents per gallon, which is about 6 times the rate of 1956. On the other hand, a first-class stamp costs 44 cents, which is roughly 14 times the amount that it was in 1956. It's critical that we continue to invest in our nation's infrastructure in order to maintain the integrity of what we have, as well as to improve in areas of need. The once clear objective of the federal aid program was to connect the nation from east to west and north to south. That objective now has proliferated to more than 100 different funding subcategories. AGC believes that the primary federal role should be to facilitate interstate commerce. To maximize a smaller federal investment, the federal involvement should be focused just on the national highway system. This newly focused federal program must allow states the greatest flexibility to make strategic decisions on the national highway system improvements that will best address the nationwide objective. For the rest of the needs, a program like the Surface Transportation Program could allow access to a more flexible program without the existing sub-allocations. Reform must also be addressed in project delivery and streamlining. Delays in project delivery can increase the cost of projects and deny users the benefits of their investment. AGC strongly supports the efforts of this committee and the Federal Highway Administration to address project delivery. The federal-state partnership should include more decision-making designated to the states. AGC has included a list of these project efficiencies in our written statement that we encourage the committee to consider. There will be a great need to provide supplementary revenue streams for traditional transportation infrastructure funding. Any potential financing tool must be carefully applied. Public-private partnerships, for example, have their place and their limits. Some policymakers portray these partnerships as the silver bullet to solving the investment gap in our transportation system. The fact is that the majority of transportation projects are unable to financially support PPP investment. In addition to PPPs, the next bill should include a transition to the next generation of federal revenue for infrastructure investment. We've included many suggestions in our written statement. We urge the committee to take the steps necessary to bring some certainty to the market and to reform the program in a way that allows for the prioritization of the greatest needs of our surface transportation network. We thank you for inviting AGC to participate in this hearing, and I look forward to any questions you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Dieterich. Mr. William Cox, President, Corman Construction Incorporated, on behalf of American Road and Transportation Builders Association. You're recognized, sir.
Good morning, Chairman Hanna and Ranking Member DeFazio, and thank you for that introduction. Corman Construction is one of the Mid-Atlantic's larger contractors. We specialize in the construction of bridges, highways, underground utilities, tunnels, and marine facilities. My grandfather started the firm in 1920, and we're currently in our fourth generation as a family-owned and operated company. We greatly appreciate your calling today's hearing and for this committee's ongoing leadership in pushing the enactment of a multi-year surface transportation reauthorization bill. Since 2008, the reauthorization of the highway and transit programs have been the subject of 2 congressionally mandated commissions, 2 other independent commissions, dozens of House and Senate hearings, and countless stakeholder recommendations. Mr. Chairman, and please excuse my sports analogy, in the spirit of March Madness, I think it's time to get the authorization bill on the court and in play, and we look forward to the committees doing that. The surface transportation bill is commonly referred to as a jobs bill. While this is certainly true, this characterization frankly undersells the value of this critical legislation. Certainly, federal transportation investments create jobs in the construction sector, but it's not the federal government's responsibility to support my industry. However, it is the federal government's responsibility to ensure the efficient movement of commerce among the states. In today's global economy, a country's transportation infrastructure capabilities are either a competitive advantage or a stumbling block. This is something our economic rivals around the world have already recognized. Furthermore, every manufacturing plant in the U.S., every retail store, every plumber and service worker, every trucker, and nearly 80 million total American jobs depend on our highways, airports, transit, and railroads for inputs and to deliver products and services. The efficiency of the nation's surface transportation network directly impacts the health of these dependent industries. And it's in this context the job-creating potential of a long-term federal transportation reauthorization bill must be considered. ARTBA strongly supports realigning the structure and mission of the highway and transit programs around clearly defined national objectives such as good movement and improved system performance. Achieving these outcomes will require program reforms to ensure the use of federal transportation funds is performance-driven, transparent, and accountable. My written testimony includes a number of specific recommendations to improve the nation's surface transportation network, leverage federal funds, and accelerate the transportation project review and delivery process. Mr. Chairman, I've spent more than 40 years in the transportation construction industry where being the lowest competitive bidder is integral to securing future work. I'm keenly aware of the bottom line and the need to control costs. At the same time, I know strategic investments in capital and personnel are essential for my company to grow and prepare for the future. There's a difference between investment and spending in the business world, and this is certainly true about the transportation programs. This incredibly important parallel should not be overlooked as well-intended efforts to reform federal spending priorities go forward. In closing, we recognize writing and enacting a multi-year reauthorization bill will not be easy. The most important thing members of this committee can do at this stage, however, is to produce legislation and jumpstart the process. Until this is done, we're all missing an opportunity to provide a long-term foundation for full economic recovery and renewed competitiveness. Thanks again for the opportunity to appear before you.
Thank you, Mr. Cox, and thank you for your candor, and congratulations on the long success of your family, and to you. Mr. Joe Jeffrey, President, Road Tech Safety Services, Incorporated, on behalf of American Traffic Safety Services Association. You're recognized, sir. Thank you.
Chairman Hanna, Ranking Member DeFazio, and members of the subcommittee, thank you very much for this opportunity to talk about the critical need for a multi-year transportation authorization. My name is Joe Jeffrey, and I'm chairman of the American Traffic Safety Services Association. ATSA's member companies manufacture, distribute, and install roadway safety devices such as pavement markings, signs, guardrail, median barrier, and other infrastructure safety features, as well as provide temporary traffic control. I'm also president of Road Tech Safety Services, a California-based company that specializes in traffic control equipment for the highway construction industry. Making the road itself safer is different from other aspects of roadway safety like seat belts and distracted driving. I believe Chairman Duncan personally understands this, as he's related stories to us of the concrete guardrail that protected him from a head-on crash last year. ATSA believes that safety must be a core focus of the next authorization. In this economic climate where all must do more with less, we understand that growing any program is going to be a challenge. Our recommendations for safety improvements are proven, cost-effective ideas that offer significant return on investment, which will help move our nation toward zero deaths on our roads. One of the most successful components of SAFETEA-LU is the Highway Safety Improvement Program. This program has been the critical factor in reducing roadway fatalities nationwide. According to a June 2010 SAIC study, which I asked to be entered into the record, every $1 million obligated by the HSIP saves 7 lives and provides a 42-to-1 return on investment. In these times of limited federal resources, it is important that we make strategic investments that will make a difference in the lives of the American people. ATSA's recommendations are included in my full testimony, but include an increase to the HSIP funding levels with a target of 10% of overall highway program dollars, and that HSIP funds not be allowed to be transferred to other programs. It is our suggestion to include language in the HSIP to get dollars down to locals for sign and striping upgrades. SAFETEA-LU also created the High-Risk Rural Roads Program, which aims to increase safety on the nation's rural roads. ATSA has recommended an increase to this program, which is vital to the American transportation network. An individual is 2.5 times more likely to die on a rural road than on an urban one. That indisputable fact alone should cause us to place a special emphasis on these roadways, including targeted funding. A national coalition called the Roadway Infrastructure Safety Coalition has emerged to advocate on behalf of this issue. As the United States population ages, it is going to be critical to make the roads as safe as possible for our older citizens. It is estimated that by 2025, 1 out of 4 American drivers will be 65 years of age or older. In SAFETEA-LU, Section 1405 raised awareness for the need to invest in infrastructure safety for older drivers, but no funds were appropriated. ATSA is recommending that funds be available in the next authorization to allow states to make improvements to aid older drivers and pedestrians. The Coalition for Older Roadway User Safety has been created to focus attention on this issue. With low-cost investments geared toward the Highway Safety Improvement Program, high-risk rural roads, and older driver safety, we will be able to make great headway in reducing fatalities. In addition to creating jobs and rebuilding our crumbling infrastructure, this next authorization bill will save the lives of thousands of Americans. As a small businessman, I understand the importance of prioritization when it comes to using limited funds. These recommendations will help to make a dramatic improvement in the daily lives of countless Americans. Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member DeFazio, I thank you and the subcommittee for the opportunity to testify today, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, sir. Mr. David R. Thomey, Executive Vice President, Maryland Materials Incorporated, speaking on behalf of National Stone, Sand, and Gravel Association. Thank you for being here, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ranking Member DeFazio. I represent Maryland Materials Incorporated. We're a family-owned business located in Cecil County in I-95 in Dr. Harris's district. Last year, we quietly celebrated our 50th anniversary. Last week, I was elected chairman of the board of the National Stone, Sand, and Gravel Association at its annual convention, and I appear before you today on behalf of NSSGA. The association is the largest mining association by product volume in the world. Our members represent 90% of the crushed stone and 70% of the sand and gravel consumed annually in the U.S. and employ 111,400 people, hardworking men and women. Aggregates are a basic material that are taken for granted, but are essential to built environment and are used in most public work projects, including roads and highways, dams, and bridges. Due to high transportation costs, proximity to market is critical. Thus, 70% of our nation's counties are home to an aggregates operation. Aggregates make up 94% of asphalt and 80% of concrete. Despite the large amount of aggregates used in all kinds of construction, our industry has experienced the most severe recession in its history. Production of aggregates in the U.S. has gone from over 3 billion metric tons in 2006, valued at $21 billion, to 1.9 billion metric tons in 2009, at a value of approximately $17.2 billion, a nearly $4 billion decrease. The company I work for has not been immune from the economic downturn. Sales reached their peak in 2006, and they've diminished by over 50% during the past 3 years. During that time, our small workforce reduced from approximately 60 employees to a current level of 23. The people we lost were hardworking, dedicated men and women who held good-paying, high-paying jobs. Most are still looking for work that will make them whole financially. I've heard it said that polling shows that unemployment does not resonate with the American people with respect to the highway bill. I can tell you it certainly resonates with my ex-employees. That being said, the aggregates industry remains optimistic, and 201 believes that passage of a multi-year, robust surface transportation bill will create good, well-paying American jobs, restore economic growth, and enhance our global competitiveness. Specifically, we agree that the highway program has lost focus, and we support elimination of the diversion of highway trust funds to projects that are unrelated to surface transportation. We support increased investment in our nation's infrastructure and recognize no one financing mechanism is a panacea. Third, we support bringing more clarity to the process of assessing indirect and cumulative environmental impact analysis and mitigation, and we urge that more common sense be brought to the process through increased agency collaboration and flexibility for the states. Fourth, we urge giving aggregate resource identification and protection higher priority in land planning so that these natural building blocks are not inadvertently sterilized. And fifth, we support regulatory reform with FHWA as the lead agency. I've heard it said from colleagues and from others that you not hear from our industry the way that you hear from other interest groups. And I believe that's true. You see, it's not in our DNA to come and ask anyone for anything. What most of our people want is simple, the freedom to follow their dreams. Mr. Chairman, we build more than roads and highways and buildings. We build the homes where we raise our families. We build the schools where we educate our children in hopes that they will have a brighter future. We do build the American dream, and before anything else, we want to assure that that dream is still possible for all Americans. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Thomey. Mr. Scott Belcher, President, Intelligent Transportation Society of America.
Thank you, Mr.
You're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the subcommittee. Thank you for inviting me to testify before you today. ITS America represents more than 1,600 public agencies, private industry leaders, and research institutes that are focused on the use of technology to address America's transportation problems. This nation is facing budget deficits requiring all governments to do more with less. In the transportation setting, These challenges will only be exacerbated by a growing population, rising congestion levels, and growing vehicle miles traveled. It's clear we cannot go forward with business as usual. As many states and cities across the country will attest, 21st century technologies are proving among the most viable and cost-effective methods for addressing transportation problems in the current budget environment. From smart highways that reduce traffic gridlock, to crash avoidance systems, to fully modernized freight management systems, to stress sensing bridges, to buses that give commuters real-time arrival and departure information, to electronic tolling systems that allow vehicles to travel through tolling gates without stopping. Smart technologies have become essential to getting the most out of our transportation system. Technology is no longer a nice-to-have amenity. It's now a must-have solution for cash-strapped agencies looking to stretch limited dollars. The Information Technology and Innovation Foundation, a nonpartisan think tank, found that ITS-enabled operational strategies have provided a 9-to-1 return on investment. 9-to-1. Here are a few examples. Synchronized and adaptive traffic signals provide a 40-to-1 return on investment in time and fuel savings by adjusting signal timing to real-world traffic conditions. Real-time traffic information systems can return $30 billion in safety, mobility, and environmental benefits for a $1.2 billion investment, according to the GAO. Incident management systems like Florida's Road Rangers program have been found to yield a 25-to-1 return on investment by improving crash and incident responses. We've included a number of ITS America's recommendations for advancing these and other technology solutions as part of my written testimony, which also includes a suggested framework for transitioning to a more accountable and performance-based system. But one specific proposal I'd like to draw the committee's attention to is H.R. 995, the Smart Technology for Communities Act, which was recently introduced by Congressman Mike Rogers and Russ Carnahan, who co-chair the bipartisan ITS caucus. This bill would create a competitive pilot program for up to 6 communities to serve as a model deployment site for large-scale deployment of intelligent transportation systems. Such programs as a potential mileage-based user fee that could vary by congestion level, time of day, or other factors. A comprehensive approach to performance management, and a connected vehicle network, which the United States Department of Transportation estimates could potentially prevent or reduce the impact of 4 out of 5 unimpaired vehicle crashes. This bill has been introduced by a broad coalition of automakers, highway and transit leaders, safety and environmental advocates, manufacturers, transportation engineers, and other infrastructure and innovation leaders. The bill would also provide a model for leveraging private sector investment and innovative financing tools to modernize the nation's transportation infrastructure, while spurring job creation and strengthening U.S. economic competitiveness. And these are the kind of jobs that the President is talking about. We would urge the committee to adopt this bill and consider ITS America's other recommendations as you work to reauthorize the Surface Transportation Bill. Finally, I'd like to personally invite all the committee members who are interested in learning more about these solutions to join us in Orlando October 16th and 20th, where ITS America will host the 18th World Congress on ITS. World Congress comes to the United States every 3 years, and it's the largest transportation technology event in the world. And lastly, I'd like for you to think of ITS America as your smart technologies resources. We're here to help in any way that we can. Thank you again for allowing me to testify.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate your time. Micah has just walked in the room, so I yield to him for as much time as he may require.
Thank you, Mr. Hanna, and thank you for chairing today's hearing and hearing from a number of national stakeholders. And while I haven't been able to join you for the whole proceedings, I thought when we proposed having these stakeholders meetings that it would be good to have everyone who had suggestions, recommendations, and represented groups from across the country to be heard in our committee as we try to put together a comprehensive transportation policy, funding formulas, and guidelines for probably what will be the next decade. I intend for this to be a 6-year bill and cover all modes. As you know, we passed an extension for the balance of this fiscal year, and I'm appreciative of your help and all those others who work towards that goal. We have some breathing time. We needed some stability. There had been 6 extensions, and that's not the way to operate the nation's transportation agencies or partner with the states and locals and others. In an effort to have everyone heard, I also had some folks have the opportunity in a series of many hearings we did throughout the United States and listening sessions. In fact, one in Cortland, New York last week with Mr. Hanna's constituents and others. And I did one in my backyard, and very pleased to, I was not here, but I had intended to introduce Ms. Sharon Calvert, who's co-founder of the Florida Alliance and who provided testimony. She came from Florida as a citizen leader of one of the most activist groups that we've ever seen that's influencing national policy, represents 120 grassroots organizations, and some of the Tea Party folks that are in town are well represented by her presentation. She's president of the Tampa group, and also the impact that they've made not only in the House of Representatives, but in national politics. And I have had an opportunity to look at her testimony, and it conforms with my goal of doing more with less, being using innovation in a time when we are constrained by, again, revenue and by the indebtedness that the nation is facing. It's probably our most serious economic and now turned into a national security issue. So I'm pleased to have someone from my state, welcome them, and others who have come today and in our other hearings across the country. I was out with Mr. DeFazio, who's joined us, the former chair of the highway and current ranking member. We were out on the West Coast, landed in Portland, down in Vancouver, never realized their proximity till that trip, but appreciate his leadership in working with us, and again, those who testified. We have a members, we've announced the members hearing next week. Is that what date? The 5th? The 5th. And I hope we could get another notice out to all the members of the House, not to talk on projects, but to talk on policy and what they would like to see as provisions in this long-term important transportation measure. With that, I apologize. I'm out. I've got group waiting that I promised to address. But again, I compliment you, Mr. Hanna, Mr. DeFazio, and your efforts to hear from all the different groups. And I think by taking these good ideas and then we'll begin together. As you know, out in California, I promised when we did a bicameral, bipartisan hearing with Ms. Boxer, the Democrat counterpart, I promised to buy beer and pizza after we hear from everyone to sit down and start discussing crafting the bill. Ms. Boxer asked if we could have fruit shakes, so it's going to be beer, pizza, and fruit shakes for members. Whatever we have to do to get the very best, most responsible legislation possible.
Could I as co-chair of the bipartisan Craft Brewers Caucus, can I choose the beer so we have good beer?
Absolutely. In fact, I'm so generous, Mr. DeFazio, I'm going to let you buy the beer. But
I'll check maybe we can get it donated, but we're going to look at the ethics rules.
So pleased to have Sharon Calvert come all the way from my state of Florida and join us and provide testimony, and yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Gerald Stump, Chief Operating Officer, Wilbur Smith Associates, on behalf of the American Council of Engineering Companies. You're recognized, sir.
Chairman Hanna, Ranking Member DeFazio, thank you. It's an honor to be here today to testify on behalf of ACEC, the American Council of Engineering Companies, where I've had the privilege of serving as national chairman. As we speak, hundreds of our senior executives of ACEC member firms are here on Capitol Hill to underscore to your colleagues that infrastructure investment, particularly a long-term transportation bill, is essential to economic recovery and national competitiveness. I want to make one clear and very specific point this morning. The transportation bill you write should empower America's engineering industry to do what we do best, and that's to design innovative solutions that help our state and local clients deliver transportation improvements faster, more efficiently, and with greater long-term value to the taxpayer. Transportation agencies that effectively harness the private sector are able to manage a wider array of projects at one time and adapt quickly to changing economic conditions and fluctuating workloads. Contracting out to the private sector helps departments meet strict deadlines, accommodate specific technical expertise requirements, and spur innovative solutions, all of which lower total project lifecycle costs. In contrast, policies that mandate the use of government in-house engineering workforces stifle innovation and competition, limit access to experienced service providers, and dampen economic growth. I noted several specific project examples in my written testimony to demonstrate the tremendous benefits of contracting with private engineering firms. Let me highlight one of those projects now that happens to be in Chairman Duncan's district. It involved the redesign of Interstate 40 through downtown Knoxville. We provided comprehensive planning and design services for the Tennessee Department of Transportation that reduced the planned construction schedule by more than 23 months by closing down the freeway, rerouting traffic in a way that minimized disruptions to the traveling public, and preserved access to the Central Business District and the University of Tennessee's main campus. With a context-sensitive approach, we also converted the project from a situation where the state was likely going to be sued by multiple local opposition groups to one where the community broadly supported the project through public service announcements. The volume and scope of design work was so extensive that it would have required the DOT to hire a significant amount of new staff or likely postpone every other project in the state in order to get it done. By engaging the private sector, the DOT was able to save more than $20 million in hard construction costs alone, avoid additional employee salary and long-term benefit costs, and successfully deliver a much-needed transportation improvement to the public years ahead of schedule. Due to the creativity and innovative solutions provided by our private sector firm, all of this was accomplished along with a much safer project which minimized disruption to the traveling public. So at a minimum, this committee should reject any legislative proposal that would limit the ability of state agencies to utilize the experience and expertise of engineering firms to deliver quality services and products. I also want to express my concern to the committee about reports that we've received that some state departments of transportation are actively marketing their services to local governments in direct competition with the private sector. From what we've been told, it's not uncommon in these instances for DOT representatives to contact county and city officials to offer engineering and design services and thereby undermine private sector firms who are offering to provide those services for local projects. This activity violates the core principle that government should not actively compete with its citizens. We're concerned about this practice and that it may also present a fundamental conflict of interest for a department that has the power to approve, disapprove, speed up, or delay plans submitted by local agencies to those departments. I recently met with Chairman Duncan, who mentioned to me that at every White House conference on small business since 1955, either the number one or number two concern that's been expressed has been freedom from government competition. This anti-competitive practice must be curtailed. At the same time, Mr. Chairman, we want to highlight that there are those DOTs that work very well with the private sector, partnering with and harnessing that private sector to more efficiently and effectively deliver projects to the public. We encourage the committee to review how those state DOTs effectively manage and utilize the project delivery capabilities of the nation's engineering firms. And finally, let me applaud the committee for focusing its attention on the problems with environmental and other regulatory reviews that unnecessarily delay projects. Our list of recommendations on this subject is included in my written testimony, and you'll find that it's consistent with what you've heard from other experts this morning and at other meetings. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Stump. Ms. Kathy J. Caldwell, P.E., President, American Society of Engineers. Do you agree that there is a danger in competition between the public and private sector when the private sector
I think there's a natural partnership there, and finding the balance is the key. Of course, the American Society of Civil Engineers has a different mission and focus than is presented by our partners in several other initiatives. We are an organization of individual members, differing from ACEC, which is an organization of corporate members. But I thank you for the opportunity to be here today, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. The American Society of Civil Engineers is pleased to offer our views on how to improve and reform the nation's transportation programs. ASCE remains concerned with the increasing and continued deterioration of the nation's infrastructure. In our 2009 report card, the nation's roads received a grade of D-, bridges a C, and transit a grade of D. A multi-year surface transportation bill with increased funding levels is necessary to address this documented gap. ASCE also supports a review of the 108 transportation programs to determine how reforms can be implemented to create a streamlined, more efficient system. ASCE urges changes to expedite the regulatory process for infrastructure projects at the federal, state, and local level. Inefficient regulatory processes delay implementation of needed projects, frequently increasing project costs. The goal must be to allow infrastructure projects to proceed in a timely manner while protecting the environment. Mandating concurrent reviews and designating a single administrative agency would improve and shorten the approval process. While the development and implementation of transportation projects in an efficient and environmentally sound manner is important, expedited environmental reviews of high-priority projects must be considered more frequently. Congress should enact a surface transportation authorization that enhances and improves connectivity. Congress should be working to address the movement of freight, as our economy will benefit by relieving freight congestion through capacity building in appropriate corridors. Another beneficial reform would be to provide flexible funding for multimodal transportation systems. Therefore, a new surface transportation authorization should include the creation of a program funded with dedicated revenue to provide new capacity and operational improvements focused on the efficient movement of freight. Lastly, ASCE supports a reliable, sustained user fee approach to building and maintaining the nation's highway and transit systems. By increasing the motor fuels tax, a much-needed infusion into the Highway Trust Fund would be provided while reducing the deficit in the long run. In the long term, however, with effects of increased fuel efficiency, other funding methods must be explored as well. A mileage-based system for funding surface transportation programs needs further study. Additionally, innovative financing such as public-private partnerships, design-build, Build America bonds, an expansion of TIFIA, and an infrastructure bank can accelerate infrastructure development and have a powerful economic effect compared to conventional methods. We must find new and innovative ways to fund and finance the transportation infrastructure needs of our nation, because relying solely on traditional sources of funding and financing are no longer sufficient. You have requested solutions. The American Society of Civil Engineers stands by to work with you in those solutions as you develop a robust surface transportation authorization which is founded on a strong national vision, program reform, adequate funding, and an integrated multimodal transportation system. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Caldwell. Mr. Burke, President and CEO of Trek Bicycle Corporation, on behalf of Bikes Belong. You're recognized, sir, and thank you for being here.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me, Chairman Hanna and Ranking Member DeFazio. I'm here to speak on behalf of the U.S. bicycle industry and also Bikes Belong Coalition. Trek Bicycle does over $800 million in sales. We also employ 1,100 people here in the United States. The bicycle business is a significant business in the United States. There's over $6 billion done in the bicycle business. Each and every year, there's 15 to 20 million bicycles sold. That's more than cars and trucks combined. There's more than 1 million Americans involved in bike or bike-related businesses. There's over 4,000 bicycle retailers in small, medium, and large towns across America. The bike business provides a growing number of high-paid professional jobs in engineering, designing, manufacturing, marketing, and logistics. The federal spending over the last 15 years on bicycle and pedestrian projects has been a great investment for America. And there's a number of reasons for that. The first reason is the bicycle has reduced congestion. If you take a look at car trips today, more than 50% of car trips, when you go out on the road, are less than 3 miles. The bicycle is a very simple solution there. If you take a look at 2009, over 4 billion trips were taken by bicycle. That set a record. A specific example is in Minneapolis, where a federal investment allowed a project called Midtown Greenways to happen. It's used by over 3,500 cyclists every day. That one greenway transports more people than 75% of the city streets in Minneapolis. The second reason the federal investment on cycling has been great is it's been simple and cost-effective. The transportation bill, 1.5% of the money goes to biking and pedestrian projects. Biking and walking make up 12% of the mode share. That's a great value. If you take a look at one example is Portland, Oregon, where Portland spent $57 million over the past 15 years to improve bicycle infrastructure. If you take a look at the cost of putting 1 mile of 4-lane highway through an urban setting, it's about $40 million. Bicycles offer a very cost-effective solution for transportation in the future of America. The third great investment that the last transportation bill made was Safe Routes to Schools, where this program was started. If you take a look back in time when I went to school, and many other people in this room did, 1970, 35% of kids either rode their bikes or they walked to school. Today, that number is less than 5%. In the last transportation bill with safe routes to school, in that time period, over 10,000 schools have enacted safe routes programs. They've reported increases anywhere from 20 to 200%. For the first time in this country's history, we're starting to move back to getting more kids walking and biking to school. All this has been done with the investment. In conclusion, the bicycle offers a simple solution to a lot of complicated problems. The bicycle can reduce congestion, it can reduce our dependence on foreign oil, the bicycle can help to combat the obesity epidemic in America. The bicycle can do all this for less than 1.5% of the transportation bill. The bicycle is a proven success, and it is a cheap date. I'd like to close with one specific recommendation for the next federal transportation bill. We need to maintain the integrity of the transportation enhancements and the Safe Routes to School program. These programs are doing great things for our communities, our business, and our nation. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you for being here. Mr. Devon Lavas. Close?
Close. Darren Lova.
Oh, Darren, I'm sorry.
Yeah, no worries.
Federal Transportation Policy Director, Natural Resources Defense Council. You're recognized, sir. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Ranking Member, for inviting me to testify. And since I'm batting cleanup, I will walk through some specific ideas that we have for inclusion in the transportation bill. And to set the stage, we all know we've deferred maintenance of roads and bridges, transit systems, and other assets across the country. And we all know that presidents from both political parties as far back as Richard Nixon have called for reduced oil dependence. So, how do we build a safer, smarter, and more fuel-efficient transportation system? First, we need to make better use of taxpayer dollars. Repair jobs and public transportation investments have high rates of return. Jobs are created in project construction, indirectly through the manufacturing supply chain, and workers spending wages domestically. We need national policy objectives for economic benefits, mobility and access, safety, oil savings, and environmental quality, as well as state and regional objectives and long-range plans and transportation improvement programs with incentives for initiatives that contribute to those goals. Two, we need to tackle chronic underinvestment and maintenance of our transportation system. 500 bridges failed between 1989 and 2003 alone, and nearly 8,000 bridges are currently in disrepair. Fortunately, 86% respondents in a recent national poll supported a fix-it-first policy that focuses on maintaining existing transportation systems before we build new ones. We need a fix-it-first standard for all modes, funding exclusively for repairs, and performance measurement for adequate progress toward a state of good repair for the whole system. 3, breaking the oil habit in transportation is key, since it accounts for 70% of the nation's oil use. Consumers deserve more mobility choices, and this is backed by a broad set of energy and transportation experts as part of a project initiated by our partner, the Institute for the Analysis of Global Security. And there's a 10-point plan. I'll just walk through very quickly. 1, we need to ensure the price of fuel better reflects oil security costs. 2, we need to deploy more high-occupancy toll or hot lanes as well as congestion pricing. 3, we need to make sure that transit dollars are allocated to optimize oil savings. 4, we need to increase auto insurance choice so consumer payments hinge on how much people drive. 5, we need to provide transit vouchers for mobility choice for low-income households. 6, we need to increase commuting options as well as telecommuting. 7, we need to send more gas tax revenue back to local areas where the most traffic is generated and where there's the most oil savings potential. 8, we need to improve local land development rules. 9, we need to deploy more smart traffic management. And 10, we need to deploy cost-effective intercity rail options as justified by cost efficiency and oil displacement potential. It's important to make leveraged investments. We do need to improve project delivery also, while keeping in mind that environmental and preservation laws account for a small share of total transportation project delays. And in most cases, time must be taken to get the most complex or controversial projects right. Having said that, we need incentives to link planning and project reviews, increased use of mitigated categorical exclusions and findings of no significant impacts, comprehensive planning initiatives so environmental impacts as well as benefits can be identified early in the process, and design flexibility for transportation projects to avoid environmental impacts. Next, we need to make sure to move goods faster and more cleanly. We can modernize the freight system, improve its efficiency while we reduce environmental impacts. We need a national plan, a multimodal freight office at DOT, project eligibility for highway trust fund spending with economic and environmental performance standards, as well as merit-based competitive grants. Next, we need to make sure to protect water, since stormwater runoff threatens drinking water in rivers and the lakes and streams where we swim, fish, and play. New and rehabilitated federal aid highways and roads should meet a performance standard to reduce stormwater runoff and meet clean water requirements. And last, we need to protect wildlife threatened by sprawling development, often driven by poorly planned transportation investments. What we need is standardized collection and analysis of wildlife vehicle collision data, better sharing of data between transportation and resource agencies, support for early resource agency involvement in planning and consideration of wildlife passages during bridge assessments. NRDC and our allies look forward to working with you, as well as the committee staff and the Congress, to get a new expanded reform transportation bill passed as soon as possible. And thank you very much, and I'm all alone at the witness stand.
You won't be for long. Eh? Thank you for your testimony. Appreciate it. We will proceed to questions. I'll recognize each member for 5 minutes, starting with Ranking Member DeFazio.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's an interesting format. 20 witnesses is a lot. Thank you all for your time and your testimony. I certainly heard some grounds for agreement on streamlining, efficiency, flexibility, but accountability, and those were objectives that we were trying to build into reforms of the Federal Department of Transportation, the proliferation of programs, and the simplification in the last authorization, and I hope the new majority follows through on some of those proposals. The one thing I'd like, and it's hard to haul people back up one at a time, so I'm really not going to engage in much of that, but my one observation is that someone toward the end there mentioned competitiveness and, talked about international competitiveness, business, and our reliance on the transportation system. And I couldn't agree more and feel that our disinvestment, we're projected now to reduce our real expenditures about 30% if we stick to what's projected to come in out of the trust fund. We heard some testimony on, PPPs can fulfill a small part of that. There's some who say somehow this is going to become a massive new solution. It won't, it can't. They have to be revenue-generating projects in order to involve the private sector. But we do want to use those as a tool. There are other tools. We heard TIFIA and that. All those things can help. But the core program still needs to be robust, and I don't think it will be. So I'm going to ask a question where I'll do people raising hands. We had the Paving Our Way, a new framework for Transportation Finance Commission report. We had the National Surface Transportation Policy Revenue Study Commission report. Both of these were done when the Republicans controlled the House, the White House, and the Senate. They were bipartisan, and they came to the same conclusion: tremendous lack of investment. Roughly, we're $46 billion under. Let's say between the two of them, $50 billion under just maintaining the existing system. And if we wanted to begin to compete with the rest of the world, build a 21st century system, we're short about $75 billion a year. Then we have the report card from the Society of Civil Engineers. This all adds up to just a tremendous shortfall. So of everyone who testified today, I'd like to see a show of hands on how many are familiar with all three of those. Well, let me do it the other way. Who hasn't read or is not familiar with all three? Okay. Ms. Calvert, I would recommend to you that you look at those, because you want to talk about the future of America, our future in the world. These point to a huge problem that we have. And then, but she was honest enough not to raise her hand. There may have been someone else who didn't raise their hand. So I appreciate that. But anyway, if you're going to be involved in these issues, I do recommend them to you. So I'd like to, we had discussion of VMT. I appreciate particularly the discussion by the Reason Foundation. Share the privacy concerns. Think there's a way we can get there. I'm concerned about equity issues, which didn't seem to get much coverage. I still believe that you put a lot more burden on the system. Rush hour in an urban area can create congestion than rural, and I think there needs to be some differential in how people are charged, but somehow you have to do it with total protection of privacy, and that's why state pilots, that's why we weren't moving there in our consideration of the bill, but we think that states should voluntarily pilot if they want and help assure that we can do things that way. How many people think that VMT, of those who testified, is something that we should begin to move toward in this authorization? Just want to say that's quite a significant show of hands. Thank you. And then one other question would be, as was noted, we haven't raised the gas tax since '93. There's been a little bit of inflation since '93. We're looking at maybe 65, 70 cents on the dollar when you spend that money of what we could buy back then. One idea that I think should be examined is, what if we indexed the existing user fee gas tax to construction cost inflation so that we don't lose more ground, at least? How many people would support that sort of an idea who testified? That's a pretty good show of hands. Thank you. And then here's the second part of that. I've begun to examine and been working with some folks on, if we did index it, there are certain ways we can make assumptions under the Budget Act and things that we're constrained by in terms of pay-as-you-go about the income over a certain period of time, set a timetable to repay some bonds, and then use that projected additional income. So we could perhaps do 40 to 60 billion bonding up front on this bill to get the number back up and to make a lot more urgent investment and or preservation needs. How many people think it would be a good idea if we could index that we would do some upfront bonding to enhance the program altogether? Again, pretty good show of hands. Thank you. Again, I find this argument, there was a lot of good stuff there. A lot of you gave very good and provocative testimony, and were we in a more normal format, I would have followed up with a lot of you with individual questions. But thank you for being here. Thanks for participating. Thanks for participating in my little bit of experimental polling there. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. I'll yield a little time to myself to ask a question next. Thank you. Mr. Grody, why should Congress increase the cap on private activity bonds if the current $15 billion bond allowance has not been fully utilized?
A good question. Our commission did recommend increasing the cap, but it didn't say when. So we acknowledge your point. It has not been fully utilized. Part of it is the pipeline of projects, the economy. We do think, as more state and local governments look into public-private partnerships, that demand will grow. When we hit the $15 billion and an increase might be needed, I guess it was our view that probably before you get around to talking about the next federal reauthorization bill. So I would put that in the context of, if you're looking at a multi-year bill, probably that cap would need to be increased within the next 5 or 6 years.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Mr. Nord, in your testimony, you highlighted the need for this bill to streamline project delivery, the process. Can you provide us with concrete examples where Utah DOT has streamlined the delivery process?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the question. It's interesting that you asked that question right now, since last week the Utah Department of Transportation delivered what we call the Super Bowl of bridge moves in Utah. We moved a bridge. We believe it's the largest bridge ever moved in the Western Hemisphere at 354 feet into place in a matter of a few hours. All of you have experience driving through a construction project that might last 6 to 9 months where we're building a new bridge. In this situation, we built the bridge off-site, closed down the freeway at 11 p.m., and by 4 a.m. the next morning, the bridge was in place and ready to be used. I think that's one example of how we can, if we are given the latitude to deliver our projects creatively to accomplish that. In addition to that, Mr. Chairman, I think the Utah Department of Transportation was the first department in the country to employ design-build back in 1997 when we reconstructed the highway in Salt Lake County. Design-build, CMGC, other creative methods have enabled us to deliver very large projects in a very rapid fashion. For example, we're under construction right now on a project, $1.725 billion project, 25 miles of freeway in Utah County. It's going to be completed in 35 months. It's 25 miles of new freeway, 10 interchanges, 63 bridges, 35 months. That's accelerated construction.
Thank you for that. Thank you for waiting so long for that.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Appreciate it. Congressman Boehlert, oh, here you are. How you doing?
I'm doing well, and it gives me a great deal of pleasure to see a successor for my congressional district in the chair. Mr. Chairman, thank you for calling me back.
Thank you for that. It's an honor. How long will it take to make the surface transportation programs more performance-based? Can it be done in the next reauthorization bill, in your opinion?
It certainly can, and we've outlined the course to follow, and we're working very closely with the very able professional staff on this committee, both sides. But we've got to get real about this whole business, and the American taxpayers are demanding more from government, and what they're demanding from government is a clearly stated set of goals, what we hope to accomplish by any program, how we hope to get there. We need metrics to measure performance, and we've got to do things differently in the future. We have 5 stated objectives we've outlined. Economic growth. Jobs should be everyone's new favorite 4-letter word. So economic growth, interconnectivity, metro accessibility, because 80% of our people live in the city, so they've got to get there, and the young people are more and more concentrating in our urban centers. We have to always focus on safety, and finally, on energy security and environmental sustainability. Those are 5 worthy objectives. This committee has a golden opportunity to really get serious about changing the way we've done things in the past. Let's not do it the same old way. Most people are sort of fed up with that. They want to change. And I think this committee historically has always been in the forefront of change, and I would encourage you to continue to do so and take advantage of the resources of the Bipartisan Policy Center. If we didn't have it, we'd have to invent it, because you've got Republicans and Democrats, admittedly has-beens, we're used-to-be's, you know, former senators, former congressmen, who are interested in shaping public policy in a responsible way. Republicans and Democrats, and then a very able professional staff. That is a model for this committee with a very able professional staff to follow. And the natural question comes down to financing. Where are we going to get the money? I mean, show me the money. Somebody won an Academy Award once for uttering that phrase, show me the money. Well, I'm not speaking for the Bipartisan Policy Center now. I'm speaking only for myself, my personal opinion. We've got to go to vehicle miles traveled. That is a fee that for use. And in the interim, until we phase into that, I'd put a $0.25 gallon tax on gasoline. right away to get the money in. I mean, proving the infrastructure of America is an absolute imperative. We can't let it crumble. Creating new jobs, jobs will be all over the place, people building. And that's America in its finest hour. So I'm glad, Mr. Chairman, and I like calling you Mr. Chairman. I'm glad, Mr. Chairman, you're in the chair, and I thank you for the opportunity to appear here and share some of my thinking.
Thank you, Congressman Boehlert. And you are an extremely difficult act to follow, but I will do my best.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for being here. Ms. Richardson?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to ask Mr. Diedrich, I apologize if I pronounce your name wrong, Mr. Cox, Mr. Tomey, and Ms. Caldwell to come forward for a couple of questions. For Mr. Diedrich, thank you. And Mr. Cox and Mr. Tomey, I have the same question for all three of you, if you could answer. When we were first looking at the stimulus in the ARA, the American Recovery and Investment Act, one of the things, unfortunately, Mr. Summers thought was that we couldn't do all the projects and spend the resources and do the investment needed within a short period of time to be able to have the jobs and see the results. Could you give this committee some confidence that if, in fact, we had the resources and we passed a good, solid bill that enabled us to do the projects that you feel you could do them in a timely way?
Well, there's no question that the money that was authorized to be spent in the stimulus was, a lot of it was mill and overlay work, and one of the things that our firm does is the milling, and we act primarily as a subcontractor to asphalt paving companies. And last year and the year before, we were part of the stimulus bill required that we report how many stimulus-related projects we had. And I think last year we did 54 projects that were stimulus-based, and the year before we did about 21. So,
and you were able to handle them as
we were able to handle them, and that was one of the only equipment investments that we made was to buy another, actually 2 mills because of that act.
Mr. Tomey?
Even with the stimulus, our production capabilities were about 40% of what they normally would have been during good times as far as the economy is concerned in 2006, 2007. We're a small company. We participated in, I know, 3 stimulus bills, and there was no problem at all.
Thank you. And Mr. Cox?
I think the stimulus funds that were directed in the transportation and infrastructure area were well spent, and I think that the industry had the capabilities to handle them. Our firm only really had 2 of them, both with the Park Service, one of which is the rehabilitation of the reflecting pool at the Lincoln Memorial, which is ongoing. But certainly they served a very needed purpose at that time to fill the gap, if you will, in the unemployment area, at least in construction that was in the infrastructure portion.
Okay. I asked those questions of you gentlemen because if we have part of the discussion will be whether we're doing a highway bill that's, 200 plus a billion versus doing one that's 500 plus, the question would be if we have those dollars and we can do that investment, do we have the resources, do we have the companies to be able to do the work and to get it done? And it sounds like the answer to that question is yes, which I agree with. Ms. Caldwell, you talked about an openness to the industry taxing itself. And I wanted to ask you to take a look at H.R. 1122, which happens to be a bill that I authored, that would call for an increase in the diesel tax. And it would also set up a dedicated freight office within the Department of Transportation. It would allow us the vision and the focus on those policies to do the connecting and so on. So one, I wanted to ask you in your organization if you take a look at the bill, and 2, if you could just share with us why you feel the freight system is not connected. You said we needed to connect it, but if you could give your experience of what the problems are and why it's not. Turn your mic on.
Sorry. Yes, interconnectivity as far as the movement of goods from ports and on roadways. So The multimodal system is what we were addressing. And we are in support of an increase in fuel taxes to provide an infusion into the highway fund now while we look at alternate sources of funding, including the VMTs.
Okay. And is our honorable Mr. Boehlert, is he still here? Did he step out? Could you grab him for me? Okay. Ms. Caldwell, could you just say, which I think is really important, transportation, I also serve on Homeland Security, tend to be fairly bipartisan committees most of the time. Could you share with us your perspective of why there shouldn't just be a no tax opinion, why there needs to be at least some sort of openness? You know, in this case, the tax hasn't been increased since 1993. It's not like we're taxing everything. Why would you make the argument, and if anyone else would like to chime in, that, you know, this should be really considered in a bipartisan fashion, and why it's not anti-business or hurting the economy?
I guess I would liken it to another sector of the infrastructure. If you think about the fact that every morning we get up and we turn on our faucet, we know that there's going to be water there to make our morning cup of coffee. But our water is very, very inexpensive. And so it's an education process, it's an openness, transparency, in saying this is what it costs to deliver that service. And I don't think Americans are looking for something for nothing. I think if they understand the value of the service that's being delivered, they're more than willing to pay their share of the cost of that service. So that would be one example that I think could easily be transferred to the ability to get to work, the ability to have services delivered, so forth in the transportation sector.
Thank you.
Representative
Sure.
Bill Cox, ARTBA for a number of years has promoted what they call the critical commerce corridors, which is specifically a project to improve the connectivity between ports, railroads, and highways for the freight movement. And I do believe that some of the other industry groups, the American Trucking Association and others, are in favor of that kind of selective taxing as long as the dollars are used for those purposes. And we promote that and support that.
Agreed. Okay, I yield back. My time has expired. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Belcher, are you out there? Oh, there you are. Thank you. Just a quick question. Do you, as Intelligent Transportation Society of America, do you agree with Mr. Moore that you can address a highway user mileage fee and still maintain privacy issues?
I do. We've had plenty of experience in a variety of industries protecting privacy. One which was represented by IBTTA in the tolling industry. We have a great record of protecting people's privacy in that industry. You think about the lessons we've learned from credit card companies, cell phone companies that all are in the business of gaining personal information and using it, but not making it available.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you all for your testimony, your time today, and your interest. If there are no further questions, I'd ask unanimous consent that the hearing record remain open until such time as our witnesses have provided answers to any questions that may be submitted to them. So with that, thank you. In addition, you can tell I'm new to this. I ask unanimous consent that during such time as the record remains open, additional comments offered by individuals or groups may be included in the hearing record. Without objection, so ordered. I would like to thank our witnesses again for their testimony today. If no other members have anything else to say, which was easy there, this subcommittee stands adjourned. Thank you again.